Welcome to the Hope, Health, and Healing podcast. I am Michelle Hannah Fields, and I am your host for episode 18, where I am joined by my friend Katie Clampitt. Katie has an incredible story of growing up in a pastor's home, having a solid foundation of faith that really helped her in her adulthood as she figured out what her faith looked like. She also shares about her mom walking through cancer for the second time after a 20-year remission, and how at the same time she was walking through her own health struggles with her husband and their battle with infertility. She shares how God was so gracious to her during those moments and how she can look back and see His hand guiding and directing her all along the way. She also shares about her ministry and things that she's involved in now and how she uses those gifts and talents that God has blessed her with to bless others. Katie also talks about what it looks like as you're walking through the middle of uncertainty and how if we just surrender to the Lord and place those dreams that have been birthed in our heart on the altar of surrender, that God takes that and He works our life according to His plan and gives us such peace as we walk through it. Sit back, relax with your favorite cup of coffee or beverage of your choice, and let Katie's story inspire and encourage you today. Well, today I am joined by my friend Katie Clampitt, and just so honored to have you as a guest today.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So I always like to share how I know people, and so you are very new to me. Your stepmom allows me to record here at the Webb's place, and when I was talking to her one day, she said, "You have to have my daughter Katie come on." And so I reached out to you and you immediately said yes. So thank you so much. And
thank you for having me. I'm excited.
so one of the things I like to start with is your faith foundation. So tell me a little bit about Katie and how you, what your childhood was like and how you came to know the Lord.
Okay. So I will say that I don't know a time, there's never been a time in my life where faith wasn't part of my life. So I grew up in Phoenix City, and for my entire life, my dad has been in the ministry. So when I was born, he was a worship leader and youth pastor at our church. And then back in 2018, he took over as senior pastor. So he's been at the same church. I mean, I'm 31. He's been there 37 years. Wow. So it was always part of my life. My core group of friends, still to this day, I met at church. We were at church all the time. It's always been part of our daily kind of routine life. And I hear a lot of pastors' kids say, like, we were always at church, but I loved being at church. Yeah. It was like my second home. I was running the halls. I knew I was in my dad's office. I was sleeping on the pews if we were there late. All my friends were there. Like, I loved being there, and still do. But I had a very privileged and kind of idyllic childhood. I grew up on a farm, so beautiful property that my parents built, and my dad raised horses and now raises bulls, and so we were outside a lot, and just really not only did my parents put a strong emphasis on faith, but a strong emphasis on community. So there was always people at our house. It was always, my family jokes that, like, it's Grand Central Station. Like, there's always people there. Yeah. They're in and out. They would just show up. There was always something going on. My house was the house that all of my friends wanted to come hang out at. My mom was a mom to all of my friends. Like, she made my dad build a pantry in the back room so she could stock everybody's favorite snacks. And it was all the snacks that you weren't allowed to have at home, like the Swiss rolls and the fudge rounds and the candy. And she knew what everybody's favorites was, and it was stacked. And so they put a big emphasis on community. And for most of my childhood, I loved church. I wanted to be there. I mean, my best friends to this day, I met at 12 and 13 at church. But as I got to be a teenager, you know, as you grow up and you mature, you kind of start to see the sides of people that maybe you miss when you're a kid. And I had a lot of church wounds from, you know, sharing information with people and then finding out that it got spread all over the church. Or, you know, if I hurt somebody's feelings, or I, you know, was involved in some teenage girl drama, then it was always escalated because that's the pastor's daughter. And I've had people call the church secretary to tell on me, and, you know, just all of these things that happen when you're a teenager and you're in a small community and you've been there for a long time, and it just, things get messy. And so when it was time for me to apply for college, I was like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm out. So I went to school in South Florida. So it was 8 hours away. And that was great. By the end of that, I was ready to come back closer to home. So I moved to Birmingham. And at that point was pretty distant from anything like church related. Like, I still had somewhat of a relationship with the Lord, but basically kind of gotten to the point where I was like, if this is what you're like, then I don't want any part of this.
And I think that's true for a lot of people. When you've had church hurt, and, you know, growing up in a pastor's family, I grew up, my grandfather was my pastor, so I know what you're talking about. Like, there's a spotlight on you, and people expect even the pastor to be perfect. But what people don't realize is we're human too. You know, we're not Jesus. We are striving to be more like Jesus, but we're not perfect. And we're not gonna do things exactly right. But the spotlight is on us so hard because of the light within us. And so, you know, that can lead to just exactly what you're talking about. Is you're like, well, if this is how I'm going to be treated, the world is treating me a little better right now. You know. And so, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Right.
And I had this moment with the Lord on my back porch when I was in Birmingham. And there was a lot of factors that took me to Birmingham. And when I got there, they all kind of blew up. So I was really alone. And I was sitting on my back porch and just kind of had a moment where I was like, if this is what you're like what I've experienced, then I don't want any part of this. Because in me, I want to treat people better than this. And so if this is how we're doing, I don't want any part of this. And very clearly, one of the marking moments in my life where I've heard the Lord the clearest, he said, I'm going to teach you how to trust me again.
Wow, that's powerful.
And I was like, okay. If you can show me something different, I'm willing to explore that. And that started a journey that where really faith for me became something that was very personal and individual to me, and not something that was just part of my norm or my parents' faith or like it. Jesus became very real and personal for me in that time period. And that was, I guess, the biggest like foundational shift of my life in terms of my faith, or one of the biggest, but that it was through those next couple of years where I feel like the Lord really started to show me who he is and who I am. Mm-hmm. And I describe it this way to people, when you have a baby, those first 2 years, all you do is make them feel comforted, cared for. You work on attachment. They have a need and you meet it. Mm-hmm. And you do that enough times and they figure out, okay, this person, when I need, they respond. You start bonding. They figure out who you are. You're learning their cues. You're not doing any kind of discipline. You're not doing any kind of growth, no maturing. All we're doing is bonding and getting to know each other. Mm-hmm. And then after that foundation is established of you can trust me and I know you and I have your best interest at heart and I always meet your needs and I always show up and then we start a maturing process. Mm-hmm. My son is almost 3 and we've just now gotten into this is how we treat people. This is how we talk to mommy and daddy. This is how we be kind to our friends. Now we can start that process because we have an established bond and trust. Mm-hmm. to where if I come at him and say, hey buddy, we don't talk to mommy and daddy that way. He doesn't have a whole identity crisis oh, she got onto me, so now none of my needs are ever going to be met.
Mm-hmm. Or she doesn't love me.
Right, or she doesn't love me, or I'm horrible, I'm terrible. He doesn't have that. Yeah. He's like, no, I know who I am, I know who you are, and you can tell me this, and it might hurt my feelings and I might cry, but we're okay relationally. Mm-hmm. And the Lord does the same thing with us. Yeah. He spends so much time showing us who he is and how we are and who we are in him, that when we get to a place where that foundation has been established, then he can come and say, hey, that doesn't look good on you. Hey, let's, and I don't have a whole identity crisis or think that he thinks I'm garbage or, whatever. And so, he really took those, I would say about 5 years of really undoing some stuff that I had believed and rebuilding, those areas and giving me a better picture of who he really is, who I am, and now I am able to love the church in all of her flaws and love people in all of their mess. Mm-hmm. And do people do things that are hurtful? Sure. But it's not I don't have an identity crisis or this huge faith foundational shake just because somebody in the church did something that hurt my feelings or didn't look like Jesus or whatever, because I have a clearer picture now of what this is supposed to look like.
Yeah. And you grow in grace. And so you grow in how to give grace, how to receive grace. Yep. You receive it from God and you give it to other people and they do the same. Yep. And so we're all learning and growing. And I love that illustration that you gave. And, just thinking about just how God loves us. He loves us enough to spend that time. And it reminds me of Paul in the Bible when he had his conversion. What did God do? He took him into the wilderness for 3 years to mold him and make him and let him know who he was, just like he did for you. And so I love that image and that picture. I grew up in the church too. I was like you. I love the church. And, I remember the day I got saved as a 7-year-old. But like you, there were times when my faith was not where it needed to be. I did not do the things I needed to do in order to maintain that relationship. But God, in his great mercy, he did the same kind of things for me. And one of the things he told me was that, I don't care about all that time in between. What I care about is what you're doing today, and I'll redeem that time for you. And so I hear you saying that same kind of thing. He took you through this process, and he loved you and cared for you and showed who he was and who you were. So I love that. Talk about one of the greatest, what what I would say is a greatest challenge to someone who is young. I know you shared about your mom's illness when you were 5. Mm-hmm. How did that play into what you thought about God too?
So my mom was diagnosed with cancer when I was 5. I don't have very many memories of that time, but do know from conversations that we had about that time that she was very fearful, and she kept me really close. Like I would, she wasn't letting me spend the night with grandparents or go to a lot of places. She kept me really close because she was very scared that she wasn't going to get to see me grow up, and that was the only time we were going to have. And so while I don't ever align with fear or think that anything good comes from fear, I think that the Lord, He gives His grace and He redeems things, and I think that He used that time to bring us together and created a bond with us that we probably wouldn't have had or to that extent, if we wouldn't have had that much time together. And so my mom is a big reason why I think I never had a full total walk away from the church. I'm done with it. There was always a part of me that I might have walked away from church, but there was always a part of me that was still connected with the Lord. And that came from my mom. Because she had walked through so many challenges, and I had witnessed how her faith was the thing that brought her through that was her anchor, in those times. Yeah, for sure. And, I think that speaks a lot to us as we go through challenges too, because we're like, well, I saw my mom hold to her faith and how strong that was. And so I know that if God brought her through that, He's going to bring me through this. I think those are marked moments in our faith too that we can refer back to. Absolutely. And so when I met my husband in 2018. I was getting my master's. We were both working, and we didn't want to have kids right away. I was like, I'm not trying to have a baby and get my master's degree at the same time. Always wanted kids, always wanted to be a mom, always wanted multiple kids, and just kind of assumed okay, well, when we decide that we're ready to have a baby, we'll have a baby. And so we had been married about a year and a half, I guess, maybe a little under that, when we decided okay, we're ready to maybe not full-blown try, but not prevent, and see what happens. Excuse me. So we did that for about a year, and nothing was happening. And so when I went to my doctor, they did all these tests, and they came back and were like, well, you just have you have infertility, but we don't know why. There's not a label we can put on it to say this is why you're not getting pregnant. We don't know why. You should be. There's nothing wrong that we can find. And that was a really hard moment for me in my faith. I was like, I've always wanted to be a mom. I was the kid that was bringing the baby doll, the diaper bag, the stroller to the grocery store, to the ballpark. And I was volunteering in the nursery. I was in VBS. I just always wanted to be a mom. And so my husband and I were living in Birmingham at the time, and I was in a prayer meeting and just really discouraged and asking the Lord, like, what's going on? Like, what's happening here? And I had this picture in my mind of an altar in front of me, and the Lord was like, are you willing to put this on the altar? And if you never become a mom, are we going to be okay? Like, are you willing to put that on the altar? And
that's a hard question.
Yeah. And to be honest, my answer that day was no.
Yeah.
I'm not willing.
Yeah.
And I was just really honest with the Lord. I was like, I don't know how to get there, but if you show me how to get there, I'm willing to go there. But today, I don't know how to do that.
And that I think says a lot, because, God looks at the heart. And even though in that moment you're like, no, I cannot put that on the altar.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and I think too, God likes for us to be honest with him.
Yep.
He already knows.
Yep.
He already knew you were at that place.
Yeah.
But he wanted you to know where you were.
Yep.
But he also wanted you to know that you were willing to follow him if he showed you how.
Yep. And so it was a couple weeks later that we got the phone call that my mom, her cancer had come back. And
how many years had it been that she had been in remission?
Over 20.
Wow. That's hard.
And that was something that she was always afraid of. It was kind of always and I have not walked the road of cancer, but I can imagine that that's always in the back of your mind.
I think the enemy, he taunts you with that. He taunts us with a lot of things, and the primary reason is to distract us.
Yep.
And
so the cancer had come back, and then a few weeks later, COVID happened and the whole world shut down. And so we were kind of parallel walking this kind of health doctor journey. She was, going to doctors for cancer treatment. My husband and I were going to having tests done for infertility, and my mom's was getting radiation done at UAB, and so she would come. We did this for about 6 to 8 weeks. She would come on Monday. My dad would take her to radiation, and then she would stay with me through the week. I would take her to her Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday appointments, Friday morning, and then we'd meet my dad, and she'd come home for the weekend. And I'm so grateful for that time, because we had so much one-on-one time together that we otherwise wouldn't have had. And so we, I was at church one day and just praying for my mom and a baby, and a friend of ours that I love dearly that has been like a mother figure to me. She came up to me and she said, I've been praying for you. And she said, I just feel like things are going to get really dark. And that's when you're going to get pregnant, because you and your mom are going to need the pregnancy to hold on to and to pull out of the darkness. And I was like, well, that's super encouraging.
I know, right?
Like, not what you want to hear, but
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that was in like May. So we get to November. I'm home for Thanksgiving. My husband decides he's going to go to Lake Martin to go fishing with one of his buddies, and I'm hanging out at my mom and dad's house. And my mom had finished radiation. She'd had surgery. She was doing so much better. She was walking around. She was super excited because she had finally been able to go upstairs, and she had driven a little bit, and I was supposed to go that night to hang out with some friends, and I I told my mom, I was like, I need to go by and see my grandmother, but I'm just going to do that on my way to my friend's house. I don't want to go and then come back and then leave again. So I'm going to go upstairs and take a nap and then leave out. So I'm upstairs, I don't know, maybe an hour, and my dad starts yelling for me. And I come running down the stairs. I run into their bedroom and into their bathroom, and I get there, and my mom is hemorrhaging. She's bleeding. She had a bag, and blood is just pouring out of it. She's on the floor. My dad's covered in blood. There's blood all over the floor. I call 911, where her eyes are rolling back in her head. She's white as a ghost. And I'm laying on the floor holding her head because she's bleeding out so bad it sounds like she's choking on her own blood. So I'm trying to sit her up a little bit. And my dad's, trying to hold pressure, and I'm talking to 911, and I have this thought that, okay, God, it doesn't get any darker than this. If what you said months ago, which had not been a word I had thought about, but it came back to me in that moment. I was like, it doesn't get darker than this.
Yeah.
So she's rushed to the hospital, and so one of my favorite parts of this story is that, so it was COVID, so nobody could go in the hospital. So we're hanging out outside of Piedmont, sitting on these horrible benches, just waiting. And I was supposed to go with my friends. I called one of them and was like, this is what's going on. I'm not coming, whatever. Well, I love coffee. I drink coffee all the time. And my friends know this. And so we're sitting out there, me and my dad. We're just don't even know what to do. Don't even know if she's alive. And my friends pull up with Starbucks, and they're like, you know what? We'll just move our hangout spot, and we'll sit on the concrete and drink coffee. And that for me is a picture of what the church is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And the community that we're supposed to have. Of they could do nothing for me. They couldn't fix my situation. But we're so happy to bring me coffee and sit on the concrete until we knew something. Yeah. And they sat there for hours.
Yeah.
And
that's like a hug from God.
It is. And it's a picture of how we're supposed to love each other. Of I can't do anything to fix this for you. I don't know how bad this is going to get, but I'm so willing and happy to sit beside you in it.
Yeah, and that's sometimes all we need.
Yeah.
We don't need somebody to fix things. No. We don't need somebody to give us an answer, because a lot of times there is no answer. There is no fixing it. But if you can just sit beside me and let me know that I'm not alone. Yep. That's all I need. Yep. And pray for me. Exactly.
So it was about 2 weeks later we found out we were pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And it was just so when all of that was happening, I was pregnant and just didn't know it.
Yeah.
And so I'm, excited. My mom's excited. She's, but that experience, mentally, she had a hard time with. We all did. Nobody wants to see that or walk through that. And so she, they had gotten all the cancer out of her bladder. It was about May of 2021 that they found a mass in her lungs. And so once they found that, she kind of checked out. And that was really hard because it felt like I was grieving somebody that was sitting in front of me. And my mom and I had always been super close. We talked on the phone every day. She was my person for everything. And
did you still live in Birmingham at this time?
And she stopped answering the phone. She would make my dad call me back. She wanted him to call and check on me. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to talk. She wasn't. And so June of 2021, she passed. And I was very pregnant. And but it's the timing of the Lord that I learned in that season, because we buried her, and then 6 weeks later I gave birth to my son. Mm-hmm. And if my son had been any older, I would not have gotten out of my bed. Mm-hmm. I would have been depressed, and I would not have, because if he would have been a toddler where I could throw some snacks on the floor, turn on the TV, and check out, mm-hmm. I would have. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he was so little, and he needed me for everything. Mm-hmm. And he refused to sleep anywhere except in somebody's arms. Mm-hmm. So I just spent all day holding him. Mm-hmm. And I would feed him, change him, and then he would nap on my chest. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did all day for months. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I kind of came out of the initial like postpartum fog, mm-hmm. Thinking like, this was the Lord's perfect timing, because he knew how much I wanted to be a mom and how important that is to me. But I was so hurt and in so much grief from losing my mom that I would not have been a good mom to him, mm-hmm. if he had been any older. Yeah. For a season. Yeah. And that would have added to my right guilt and, mm-hmm. All of that. And so mm-hmm. the Lord's perfect timing was, hey, you're going to have a newborn that demands your attention, mm-hmm. that demands that you get up, that you move around, mm-hmm. that you keep going. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had this moment looking at him one day. My husband had gone back to work, and I kind of had this moment where I looked at him and I was like, I have to be your mom first before I'm her daughter. Yeah. Like I had this shift from I'm Debbie's daughter to I'm Mitchell's mom. Yeah. And I have to be his mom. Mm-hmm. Above everything else. Mm-hmm. I have to be his mom. Yeah. And he saved me. Mm-hmm.
And God knew that.
Yep.
And you the whole time that you're going through the infertility, like he knew.
Yep.
Like
he did. And it was
and we don't understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like the cherry on top, which ends up being such a cool part of this, is that one of my best friends, we've been best friends since we were 15. We own a business together. Her second born and my son were born on the same day.
Oh, wow.
They're 8 hours apart.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so it was like, we're still in Birmingham at the time. And I looked at my husband one day and I said, I think the Lord's calling us to move back to Phoenix City. And he was like, I don't know about that. I ain't heard that. I was like, I'm just saying.
Now, where was he from?
He's from Louisiana.
Okay.
So we met in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And we had a great community in Birmingham, but we didn't have family. Mm-hmm. And so we were, a couple days later, we had bought a house in February. This is like October of the same year. Mm-hmm. And he comes back and he says, okay, if we can sell the house and not lose any money, then I'll move. Mm-hmm. And that's not a thing. Like if you've lived in a house less than a year,
right,
there's no chance you're not losing money. Right. So we call the realtor, who is a good friend of ours, and we're like, hey, this is what we think the Lord's telling us to do. This is what Jonathan's saying. So he's like, all right, well, let's just, put it out there and see what happens. So we put the house, it doesn't even go live. It's just on the like coming soon. And our realtor calls us and he's like, I'm not one that says take the first offer. He said, but we just got an offer that's like $15,000 over asking.
Wow.
And my husband runs the numbers and he's like, yeah, we're going to sell this house and we're not going to lose any money.
We're actually going to make money.
Yeah. And I was like, so very quickly we pack up. Some friends of ours own a house that they were renting out to somebody else we know, and she was actually in the process of getting her permanent home set up, and she was moving out of that house the week before we needed to be in somewhere. And so they rented it to us. It was perfect, and God just lined everything up for us to move back. And being back with my family, with my core like group of friends, getting to raise our kids together, like that was so healing for me too. Being around people who really knew my mom just was very very healing for me. And what I learned and what I continue to learn through that process is, you know, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, what's your greatest fear? It would have been losing my mom. And when your biggest fear comes true, when everything in your world falls apart, Jesus is really the only thing that stands.
Yeah.
And I think because I had those foundational years with the Lord of him showing me who he is, I didn't walk through a phase where I was mad at him because of this.
Yeah.
I was able to see it that like, wow, God, like look at all of these ways through this process that you showed up.
Yeah.
Look at all of the ways that you put people and things in my life to help me through this process. Look at all of the doors that you opened so that we could get back home. Look at all of the ways that you showed up for us. And because you were willing to sacrifice your son, I get to see my mom again. Like, how could I not be in love with Jesus?
Yeah.
Because one day, because of what he did, my mom and I will be together.
Yeah. And one thing I think too is, as you're saying that, I think you thought it was your idea to go to Birmingham, but it was not. It was all in God's perfect plan, because he knew he needed you in Birmingham because of what your mom was going to go through.
Yep.
And he had you in the perfect place so that you could spend that time together.
Yep.
Even though, you know, you spent that time as a 5-year-old, you don't really know like what all that felt like. But then 20 years later, you can tell all the things. And, you know, you spent that time. And so God, even in grief and even in those hard things, you can look back and you can see God moving and how he put all the pieces perfectly in place. So I love that.
I wrote a devotional a couple years ago, and it was called Even in This. And that's a question that the Lord always brings me back to as I walk through situations of, like, even in this, will you trust me? Even in this, will you see my goodness? And my mom used to always say, there's grace for that. And I remember waking up the day after her funeral, and I had her reading glasses and a cup of coffee, and I could just hear her saying, like, Katie, there's grace for this.
Yeah.
And there really has been. I mean, it has not been easy. Like, I mean, I still have moments where I feel like I've been kicked in the gut. I watch my little boy and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just wanted her to be here to see this. Never thought I would raise my kid without her there. But the Lord has been so good and gracious. You know, my dad got remarried, and I told him when, which we always knew he would. He doesn't like to be alone. And my mom used to joke that they'd be lined up at the funeral, so when he told me, that he was thinking about dating or, whatever that looks like, I said, okay, I have 2 stipulations for this. And I said, she's got to have her own stuff. She's got to have her own money, her own house, her own, we're not doing, drama. Mm-hmm. She needs to be stable on her own without you. Mm-hmm. You're not in a position in your life to be anybody's savior or rescuer. And 2, if she has kids, they need to have their crap together. Mm-hmm. You've raised your kids, you have grandkids, you're in a season of life where you want to be with your grandkids, you want to enjoy that, and we don't have time to be dealing with grown children drama.
Yeah, for sure.
And so he was like, okay, that's fair. Mm-hmm. And so he called me one day and told me that he was thinking about asking Angie out to dinner. And I was like, well, I told you my 2 stipulations. So I'm good. Mm-hmm. Whatever you need to do. I love you. And I remember my husband looking at me and he's like, you're okay with this? And I said, well, it's weird. Mm-hmm. I mean, my parents were madly in love with each other. That's all I've ever known. Never thought I would have a stepmom or anything, mm-hmm. This is weird. Mm-hmm. I said, but I'm at home every night with you and Mitchell, and my dad's by himself. Mm-hmm. And if I was 12, we'd be having a different conversation. Mm-hmm. But I'm a grown woman. My brother's grown. He has his own family. And it's super unfair of us to say, no, Dad, you need to be by yourself until we feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. But we're going to be with our families. Mm-hmm. And you just be alone. Yeah. So is it weird and hard? Sure. But things can be good and hard at the same time. Right. They don't have to be one or the other. Yeah. And so my dad called me. I called my dad one day and I was like, we were still in Birmingham, and I told you Mitchell would not sleep unless you were holding him, which made showering, pumping, all those things really difficult. Yeah. So I called my dad one day and I was like, can you come up here and just hold him so I can take a shower, take a nap, pump, I'm just at my wit's end. And he was like, yeah, I'll come. And so he called me back maybe 30 minutes later, and he said, do you care if I bring Angie? And I was like, Dad, I don't care if you bring the entire church on the van. Just get up here and hold this baby. Yeah. I want to take a shower. I don't care. Bring somebody you find on the street. I don't care.
Just get here.
Just get here. So they came up, and from that day to today, she has been such a godsend. She is a brilliant grandmother. For somebody who had absolutely no preparation and was just thrown into it, incredible. My son is obsessed with her. Yeah. She is one of his favorite people, and she is active with him. She's not one that if we go to his house, she's doing her own thing, and he's she's in the pool with him. She's teaching him how to feed the chickens, and she's taking him to get, and I see God's goodness in that. Yeah. That if my mom couldn't be here to be a grandmother to him, wow.
He sent you the perfect one.
Yes. That where I may feel a gap, my kid doesn't. Mm-hmm. He doesn't know any different. Mm-hmm. And he's obsessed with her. And for his whole life, she's going to be his grandmother. Yeah. And that's all I ever wanted for him. Yeah. And if my mom couldn't be there, then thank you, Jesus, that it's somebody that loves my dad, that loves my kid, that is, that doesn't see a difference that just sees us all as a family and loves him. And so I've seen, as we walk this journey, again, it's been hard, but I've seen God's goodness and the ways that he has shown up and loved me and really mothered me through this process in the absence of a mother. And so again, in my kind of ideal world of I'm going to have all these kids, I thought like, okay, well, we had trouble with the first one, but the rest will be a breeze.
Yeah, God's got it all.
Be a breeze.
Yeah, he's opened my womb. We're good.
No. So we started about a year ago thinking about having another baby, and it has not happened yet. And again, they don't know why. They have no, and I wanted to share this part because I feel like a lot of times when we hear people's stories, we hear the testimonies and how God came through in the end. And this is something we're still kind of in the middle of.
Right.
And, I was sitting at home on the day before Mother's Day, and I was watching my son, and I thought, you know what, God, if we never have another one, you answered every prayer in that kid.
Yeah.
You gave us everything we asked for and more in him. And so I'll put this on the altar that if he's the only one we ever have, it was enough.
Right.
It was more than what we thought we would ever get.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
And I believe and it's a desire of my heart that we have more kids. And I believe that God is going to, answer that in his timing. But it's so much easier now to release it and say, okay, God, like whatever you have. And if we get pregnant next week or we get pregnant next year, it's for a reason. Because my son needed to be born at that time for what was going on.
Yeah.
And any other kids we have after that will be the same thing.
Yeah.
And my best friend told me the other day, she goes, if I would have been born any time younger or older, we wouldn't be friends.
Right.
And, I think that about my son and my best friend's daughter, Marley. I mean, they're born on the same day. They act like twins. They're best buddies. They're going to be best friends their whole life. We might be pitching for some sort of arranged marriage, but
we're praying to God.
Yeah, I'm like,
can you work this out too?
This would be great.
Yeah.
But they need each other, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know that God did that for a reason.
Yeah.
I know that that there's going to be times in their life where they need each other. And I know that he brought us here so that we could all raise our kids together, so that they have that core group that we've always had to fall back on, those friends that are going to show up with coffee and sit on the concrete. Yeah. And so, I don't know what the rest of this journey looks like, but I do know that when I don't understand or when I can't see what the end is going to look like, that I can trust who God is.
Yeah. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. That's so true. We can trust in the Lord. We don't lean on our own understanding, but as we acknowledge him in all of our ways, then he directs our steps and our path. And I just love that you can look at that, and even though you're going through the hard right now, even though it's something you don't understand, you can still say, God, you've been faithful. And whether you do it the way I want you to do it, or you do it the way that is best, that I can't even see right now, I'm trusting you. And there's a song by Babby Mason, and she talks about when I can't trace his hand, can trust his heart.
Yep.
And so, all that means is when I can't see what he's doing, I know he's still working on my behalf, and he's got my best interest in mind.
Yep.
And he's going to work it out exactly the way it needs to be for me.
Absolutely.
Yes, I love that. Well, what is next for you? I know you said you have a business. What is your business?
So my best friend and I own a wedding and event business, which is super cool that my parents ended up buying a wedding venue.
Yes, and it's a beautiful venue.
Yes, and we coordinate weddings out here some, but we do wedding and events, and that's just a lot of fun. It gives me a creative outlet, but I'm also a social worker, so I work with a couple different nonprofits, grant writing and doing program development. Really passionate about kids and teens, young adults that, like I said, my mom, we were the house for everybody. And kids would show up at our house if their house was chaotic. They would show up if they needed, she was a mom to everybody. And that, so I'm really passionate about helping kids and young adults who have lacked that in their life for whatever reason, and making sure that they have the resources and the help that they need to be successful, and understand that the cards that you were dealt don't define who you are. And I came from a very ideal home with two parents who were crazy about each other, and my husband came from divorced parents, and so both of us, for different reasons, are both passionate about this area and seeing families be together and be all that God has called them to be, and raising their kids in community. And my friends and I joke that we're all co-parenting. Like we just all raise each other's kids. It's like at any moment one of us is going to be on all of them, somebody else's kid. There's no because you need that. We weren't designed to do this alone, and not even just as a family unit. We need community. We need people around us that support us and love us. And my husband calls them 3 a.m. friends. That you can call at 3 o'clock in the morning and they'll show up, no questions asked. And we lack that in our society. We don't have a high value for friendship. We're trying to, the enemy loves to isolate us. That's one of his biggest tactics. And friendship is such a high value for me and my husband. Like, we invest so much time into our friendships because we need it, and we know how important that is. And being a good friend and having community and just living life together, that has saved us many times. So we're really passionate about seeing that. So I'm a social worker, and which I love, and then get to do kind of the fun, creative wedding stuff on the side, which is just me and her just do it because we love it and it's fun. I love that. And, I think I too grew up in a family like yours. My parents loved each other. We did a lot together as a family, and just that foundation of faith that I saw. And so to me, I'm the same as you. Like, it breaks my heart for somebody who didn't have that. I don't think that I don't lift myself up because I had that. My heart is broken for people who didn't. Absolutely.
And so, I told that to my husband the other day. I was like, we watched a movie, which is crazy because it wasn't real life. I cried through the whole thing and even into the night. Like, we went to bed and I was still crying. He's like, what is wrong with you?
There's certain movies I'm like, you have to turn this off. You have to turn this off.
I was like, my heart is broken because I know that was just a movie, but my heart is broken because it's real for somebody. And so I love that you are, doing your part, what you can do to help create a different life for some other kid.
Yes.
And just are passionate about that. So I love that. And, I do believe that God, he weaves our story, and there's a beautiful tapestry that he weaves. And sometimes all we get to see is the strings hanging down.
Yep.
But sometimes he gives us a glimpse of the other side. And I think those are the moments that you look back and you see, oh, well, God, I see how you worked in this. Yep. And he gives you that glimpse. What is next for Katie?
So, prayerfully, another baby.
Yeah.
We're super involved at our church. My dad, like I said, he's the senior pastor, so I lead our women's ministry there. My mom started that, and when we moved back, I picked that up, which is super fun. And actually, work-wise, is in terms of my day job, am trying to slow down a little bit, pitching, rolling around some different ideas of ways that I can support other organizations, and kind of multiply versus add, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, also looking at some, ways that we can help families in the area, and, teaching and helping and supporting people that, may have a similar story to my husband of you came from a family of divorce and infidelity, but that doesn't have to be your story.
Right.
And
God redeems that too.
Yes. And I've seen that in I looked at my husband the other day and I said, you are the most loyal husband I have ever met. Like, I don't know anybody more loyal than you. And when you were Mitchell's age, your dad had left. And look at you. Like, you are one of his favorite people. Like, you don't just come in this house and, hey, buddy, and, like, y'all go fishing and you play in the backyard and you change diapers and like, I'm not a single mom who has a husband. Mm-hmm. Like, you're engaged and involved. You look at what the Lord did. Like, look at what you have done. This is incredible. Yeah. Like, your family line is forever changed. Right. Because you made the decision to follow the Lord, to listen to him, even when it was hard and you didn't want to. Right. And your family line is forever changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. You're not defined by what happened to you or what you did. You're defined by what God says. Yes. And our son will never know what it feels like to be abandoned by his dad, or to have to pack up his stuff and go to his mom's house for the weekend or whatever. Mm-hmm. He'll never know that because of the decisions and the choices that you made and the work that you allowed the Lord to do in your life that wasn't easy. Yeah. Yeah. And so we're very passionate about, people seeing that and trying to figure out ways that we can help those. And then I am doing everything I can to bring more fun back into my life. Yeah. You get bogged down with kids and work and all these things you have to do. And I used to paint. I used to do all kind of arts and crafts, and so my event business has been fun because I can play with flowers and I love floral arranging and creating new stuff. And I went to Hobby Lobby yesterday and bought stuff to paint. I was like, you know what, we're going to do more stuff that's fun. Yeah. I love that. And, God will use that talent too, because he gave it to you for a purpose. And, I love that you are tapping into that and bringing fun back in. Yeah. And, God will bless you, and he will use that and give you a vision for what he wants
through that gift as well. I'm excited to see where he takes you on that journey, and we'll be praying that another baby is in his plans for you, and that we know that it will happen in the right time if it is in his plan. Well, I have 3 questions I like to ask all of my guests. So the first one is, if you could only have one scripture to hold to, what would it be? If you're like me, it depends on the day.
Yes, I would say most days is probably, and I'm going to get the verse wrong, but it's Matthew 28. It's the last scripture in Matthew where Jesus is getting ready to ascend to heaven, and he says, "Go and make disciples in all the world, and I'll be with you even to the end of the age."
Yeah, the Great Commission.
And that's kind of been the journey of my life is, okay, I don't know what this looks like, but you're with me, and that's enough.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I already know the answer to this, but I don't know part 2. All right, so are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, and how do you take it?
So very, very coffee. I do love tea, though. I drink hot tea at night, like decaf hot tea at night. So really both, but probably more heavy on the coffee. I used to take it very sweet and sugary. I did Whole30 and learned that my body does not like sugar. So I usually do a little bit of cream, and that's it. Okay.
Do you use like half and half, or?
I am not picky about that. The only flavor I like is vanilla. I don't like caramel, hazel. Those kind of get too sweet for me. So it's either going to be like almond milk, oat milk, or like a French vanilla, and that's kind of as fancy as I get.
I gotcha. And if you could go anywhere in the world, where would your dream vacation be?
I would love to go to... Oh, that's hard. If I'm going with my husband, I want to go somewhere tropical, like Fiji, or like, we love the beach. If I'm going with my sister, then we're going to like Paris, where we can shop and eat at cafes and drink tea and sit around all day, that my husband is not going to do. And if I'm going by myself, I want to go somewhere where there is tons of bookstores. Because I love to read. So I can sit in a bookstore all day.
All right. Well, that leads me to one more question then. What is your favorite book you've ever read?
My favorite book is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna.
Okay. What about that do you like?
It's about 2 sisters in World War II. It's incredible. You'll cry. And the story is incredible. The sisters kind of go separate ways. I gave it to she's technically my sister-in-law, but we don't say that because she's been in my life since I was 4. So I gave it to her, and I was like, "You're Vianne in this book, and I'm Isabel." And she was like, "Okay, I'm going to read it." And Vianne's a school teacher, and she stays at home during World War II, and she is trying to keep her family, her daughter, safe, and she ends up rescuing a lot of kids. And Isabel is the firecracker who is smuggling soldiers across the border and taking contraband written stuff, delivering messages that she's not supposed to be doing, and getting into all sorts of trouble. But she comes back home after the war from a concentration camp, and she's bald, no teeth, and she looks at her sister and she says, "It was enough. My life was enough." And that phrase hit me of like, it's fiction, but this girl who her whole life was helping other people. She was in a concentration camp and she's about to die. And for her, that was enough.
Yeah.
And it really centered me back to where I think the Lord calls us, of like, I don't need all this extra stuff. I just need you and this purpose, and that's enough. So
I love that. Well, thank you for sharing with us today, Katie, and I look forward to seeing what God does in you and through you in the coming months and years.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Hope, Health, and Healing. I know that Katie has given you some words of wisdom and some hope and encouragement through her own journey of faith that you can take with you and apply to yours today. Join me next time as my friend Kendra LeGrand with Proverbs 31 Ministries shares about her journey of faith, what it looked like for her to take a huge step of faith, entering into a new city, waiting on a new job and a new opportunity that was awaiting for her, what that looked like for her, and also what it looked like for her as she walked through and embraced her journey of singleness, trusting God all the way to bring her the spouse that He had for her. Now, like and share this podcast with your friends and family, and be sure to follow this show so that you get future notifications of our episodes. Thank you and have a great day.